Abigail Carter did not cry when her stepmother handed her over to a stranger like something unwanted at market. She pressed her lips together, lifted her chin, and walked out the door on her own 2 feet, because if she was going to be humiliated, she would not give Margaret Bellamy the satisfaction of watching her break. She did not know that one decision to hold herself together when everything was falling apart was about to change the course of her entire life. If you're new here, subscribe and come along for the ride. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1816 came in hard and dry across Harlow County, Virginia. The kind of summer that cracked the earth and made tempers short and mouths mean. Corn stood half its usual height in the fields. The creek behind the Carter property had shrunk to a trickle. And inside the Bellamy household, what used to be the Carter household, before Abigail's father died and left the deed in the wrong hands, the heat made Margaret Bellamy meaner than usual. Abigail had learned to read the signs years ago. The way Margaret's jaw tightened when she entered a room. The way her eyes moved over Abigail, the way a woman's eyes move over furniture she intends to sell. The way her voice went soft and smooth right before she said something that would leave a mark. Abigail was 24 years old. She had spent 6 of those years learning to make herself invisible inside this house. She cooked. She kept the accounts. She mended what needed mending and said nothing about the things she couldn't fix. She had made herself useful enough that Margaret kept her around, and small enough that Margaret never felt threatened by her. It was a careful balance. She had maintained it for 6 years. She should have known it wouldn't last. The morning it happened started like any other. Abigail was at the kitchen table before sunrise, working through the household ledger with a stub of pencil, and the kind of concentration that came from knowing that numbers at least did not lie. The ledger was a mess. It had been a mess for 3 years since Margaret's son Clifton had taken over managing what remained of the Carter land, and since Clifton had the financial instincts of a man who believed that money replenished itself on its own. Abigail had been quietly correcting entries for months, not saying anything, just fixing what she could. She had found things she wasn't supposed to find. She had found them and said nothing, and kept her expression flat and gone back to making herself invisible, because she understood something important. A woman with no legal claim to anything is a woman who cannot afford enemies. She was halfway through June's entries when Margaret appeared in the doorway. Abigail. One word. That smooth, quiet voice. Abigail looked up slowly. She set the pencil down flat. Ma'am. Margaret was already dressed for the day, which meant she had been up planning something. Margaret never dressed before 8 unless she intended to accomplish something she didn't want interrupted. We'll be having a visitor this morning, Margaret said. Nathaniel Whitmore. Abigail held her expression still. Nathaniel Whitmore was not a name you heard without feeling it land. He owned half the good farmland between Harlow Creek and the county line. He had served as a county magistrate for 4 years. He had come back from the war in 1814 with a leg injury and a reputation that had somehow only grown larger in his absence. People in town spoke about him the way they spoke about weather, with respect, and with the understanding that you didn't make predictions about what he would do. I see, Abigail said. He's coming to discuss the northern parcel, Margaret said. The acreage your father left unregistered. I've had it surveyed. Something in Abigail's chest went very quiet. The northern parcel. 23 acres of good bottomland that her father had never gotten around to filing properly because he trusted that family did not require paperwork. 23 acres that Abigail had walked every season of her childhood. That her mother had planted herbs along the edge of in neat rows that still came up every spring out of pure stubbornness. That land is part of the original Carter deed, Abigail said. Her voice stayed even. She had practiced keeping her voice even. The original Carter deed was never finalized, Margaret said. Your father understood that. My father told me, your father is not here. Margaret let that sit a moment, the way she always let things sit when she wanted the weight of them felt. Nathaniel Whitmore is interested in that parcel. I've agreed to meet with him. I expect you to be present. Abigail looked at her. Why? Because I want him to see that our household is properly managed. Margaret smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach anything above her jaw. "And because I want him to see you." That was when the quiet thing in Abigail's chest became something colder. Nathaniel Whitmore arrived at 9:30. He was taller than Abigail had expected, which was saying something, because she had heard enough descriptions of the man to have built an expectation. He moved with a slight hitch in his right leg that didn't slow him down so much as it made every step deliberate, like a man who had learned to be careful about where he put his weight. He carried no hat when he stepped inside, just held it against his side, and his eyes moved across the front room the way a man's eyes move when he's cataloging what he sees. They moved to Abigail. They held there a beat longer than they moved anywhere else. Then they moved on. Margaret did the speaking. She was good at speaking. She laid out the acreage, the survey numbers, the terms she was proposing. She poured coffee that Abigail had made and offered it with a graciousness that Abigail recognized as performance. Clifton sat in the corner chair and said nothing useful, which was consistent. Abigail sat where Margaret had positioned her, near the window, hands folded, mouth shut. She was meant to be decorative. She understood that now with a clarity that felt like cold water. At some point, Whitmore turned to look at her directly. "You've been quiet," he said. "Not unkind, just a statement." "I was asked to be present," Abigail said, "not to speak." Something moved across his face that she couldn't read. "And if you were asked to speak?" Margaret laughed, the bright social laugh she used when she wanted to steer conversations. "Abigail manages the domestic accounts. She wouldn't have opinions about land transactions." Whitmore did not look at Margaret. He kept looking at Abigail. "Is that right?" he said. Abigail met his eyes. She held them for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to be a reply, not long enough to be a challenge. Then she looked down at her hands. The meeting concluded shortly after. Margaret walked Whitmore to the door. Abigail heard the low exchange of voices on the porch, but could not make out the words. When Margaret came back inside, she was still smiling. That was when Abigail understood that something had just been decided without her. She found out what it was at dinner. Margaret waited until the meal was halfway through, waited until Clifton had eaten enough to be slow and comfortable and unlikely to object to anything, before she set down her fork and looked across the table at Abigail with that composed, pleasant expression that Abigail had come to understand was the face Margaret wore when she had already won. "Nathaniel Whitmore has a household that requires management," Margaret said. "His housekeeper left in the spring. He has not replaced her." Abigail set her own fork down, slowly. "He has an acquaintance visiting from Richmond next month," Margaret continued. "A man of some importance. He'll need the household in order for a formal visit. His steward brought the matter up to me last week." "To you," Abigail said. "I've arranged for you to go," Margaret said. 2 weeks. You'll manage the household preparations. See that the house is ready." The table was quiet. Even Clifton had stopped chewing. "You arrange this," Abigail said carefully, "without speaking to me." "You're part of this household," Margaret said. "I arrange what's needed. I am not—" Abigail stopped. She took a breath. She was aware of her hands on the table, and she made sure they stayed flat and still. "I am not a servant to be sent to another house." "No one said servant." Margaret picked up her fork again. "You'd be going as a household manager. It's a respectable position. For 2 weeks. To begin with." That last part, those 3 words, sat in the air between them like something with teeth. Abigail looked at her stepmother's face, at the pleasant, composed expression, at the small satisfaction tucked into the corners of Margaret's eyes. And she understood. This was not about Nathaniel Whitmore's household needing management. This was about Abigail knowing too much. This was about the ledger. About the entries she had been correcting quietly for 3 years. About the northern parcel and the survey and the money that had been moved through accounts that should not have received it. This was Margaret solving a problem. Abigail was the problem. "And if I refuse," Abigail said. Margaret looked at her with something that might have been pity if it had contained any warmth. "You have no income, no property, no legal claim to anything in this house. I have been generous in allowing you to remain here out of respect for your father's memory." She paused. My patience has a limit, Abigail. It would be a shame to reach it. The dining room was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a late summer cicada was screaming its mechanical scream into the heat. Abigail picked up her fork. She finished her dinner. She did not say another word. She packed that night. Not much. A dress, 2 shifts, her mother's Bible with the pressed flowers still inside it, columbine from the bottomland, dried flat between the pages of Psalms, the small leather case with her pencils, and the folded paper she used for her own accounts. The $4.60 she had saved over 3 years from the small allowance Margaret occasionally remembered to provide. She sat on the edge of her bed with the bag at her feet and looked at the room that had been hers since she was 18 years old. She had fixed the window latch herself the second winter here, when it wouldn't stay closed and the cold came through. She had painted the dresser with leftover whitewash from the barn because the original finish had gone gray and rough. She had put up the curtain rod with 2 nails she'd salvaged from a broken fence rail. She had made this room livable with her own hands. And tomorrow she would leave it, and Margaret would probably give it to one of Clifton's associates who came through town, and none of what she had done here would matter. She sat with that for a long time. Then she lay down on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling, and thought with the flat precision she used when she was working through a ledger about what she actually had. She had her mind. That was not nothing. She was good with numbers in the way some people were good with music not learned, but felt instinctive running in her somewhere at a level deeper than thought. She had watched men manage properties twice the size of the Carter land and make decisions in an afternoon that she could have seen through in 10 minutes. She was not being arrogant about that. It was just true. She had her discipline. 6 years inside Margaret's house had taught her that. The ability to hold herself together when everything around her was designed to make her come apart. And she had her reputation such as it was. It was not much, but it was not yet ruined. She intended to keep it that way, whatever. Margaret Bellamy had arranged. Whatever the plan actually was. Abigail was not going to Whitmore Manor as a woman being discarded. She was going as a woman who intended to be useful. And if Nathaniel Whitmore turned her away, which was entirely possible, because she still did not know the full shape of what had been arranged without her, she would figure out the next step from there. She had been figuring out next steps her entire life. She was good at it. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. The morning she left, Margaret did not come out of her room. Clifton stood on the porch with his coffee and watched her walk to the road with the single bag and said, "You'll be back inside a week," in the tone of a man delivering a verdict he found satisfying. Abigail did not answer him. She walked to the road and turned north and did not look back. The driver. Margaret had arranged a hired man named Burrell, who clearly knew nothing about the actual situation, drove her the 6 miles to Whitmore Manor in a wagon that smelled of feed grain. He was friendly in the incurious way of men paid to transport things without asking questions. He talked about the weather. He talked about the drought. He said Whitmore Manor was a fine property, and Mr. Whitmore kept it well and paid his people fair, which he offered as high praise. Abigail sat in the wagon bed with her bag on her lap and watched the county unspool past her and thought about the northern parcel. 23 acres. Her mother's herbs coming up stubborn in the rocky edge of the field every spring. She thought about the ledger entries. The ones she hadn't corrected. The ones she'd left where they were because she didn't have proof yet. Just a strong and growing suspicion, and suspicion without proof was a weapon you could not use without destroying yourself first. She thought about Margaret's face at dinner. That pleasant, composed expression. "I've been generous in allowing you to remain here." She thought about what that meant. About how carefully she had made herself invisible for 6 years. About how little it had protected her in the end. The wagon turned up a long lane lined with old oaks. Whitmore Manor came into view. It was a working estate, serious and plainly built, without the ornamental excess that some Virginia landowners went in for. The main house was large and well-maintained white-painted boards, showing clean against the summer green. There were outbuildings she could see from the lane, a barn, a smokehouse, what looked like a granary. The kitchen garden to the left of the house was extensive and kept up, which told her something about whoever was managing the domestic side, or had been managing it before the housekeeper left. The wagon stopped. Burl climbed down and offered her a hand, which she took because she was carrying the bag, and not because she needed steadying. She stood in the drive and looked at the house. A woman in her 40s came out the front door, gray-streaked hair, apron, brisk walk. She stopped when she saw Abigail, and her expression moved through several things in quick succession: surprise, assessment, and something that settled into careful neutrality. "Miss Carter," the woman said. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Dolly. I manage the kitchen." She looked at the bag, then back at Abigail. "We were told to expect you, though we weren't told much else, to be honest." She paused. "Mr. Whitmore will want to speak with you." "Of course," Abigail said. Dolly turned toward the house and Abigail followed, and she was halfway up the front steps when the door opened and Nathaniel Whitmore himself filled the frame. How was in his working clothes. Not the coat he'd worn to the Bellamy house, shirt sleeves, plain trousers, boots that had been walked hard in. He had clearly come from somewhere on the property because there was a smear of dried mud on his left sleeve. He looked at her without any of the social smoothing people usually applied when they encountered a situation they hadn't fully anticipated. He just looked at her. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Whitmore." A pause. Not uncomfortable exactly, but not nothing. "You're earlier than I expected," he said. "I was told this morning," she said. "I apologize if the timing is inconvenient." Something shifted in his expression. She couldn't name it precisely. He stepped back from the door, not quite to the side, more straight back, opening space. "Come inside," he said. She came inside. The front room was cooler than outside, which was a relief she didn't let show on her face. Whitmore gestured toward a set of chairs arranged near the far wall, and she moved toward them, and that was when she really noticed the slight hitch in his walk as he crossed ahead of her. More pronounced than it had seemed at the Bellamy house, where he'd had less distance to cover. His right leg took each step a fraction of a second behind his left. He didn't seem conscious of it. Or perhaps he was so past being conscious of it that it had stopped reading as awareness at all. He reached the chairs and turned. He didn't sit. He looked at her with those measuring eyes and said, "I need to be direct with you." "Please," Abigail said. "Whatever Mrs. Bellamy told you about the nature of this arrangement, I don't know if it matches what she told me." His voice was even. Not unkind, but not softened either. "She came to my steward 3 weeks ago with a proposal. I agreed to consider it. What I agreed to consider was the possibility of hiring a competent household manager to oversee the preparations for a visit in August. I did not agree to anything else. I want that stated clearly." Abigail looked at him. "Mrs. Bellamy told me you needed a household manager," she said. "For 2 weeks, to begin with." Something crossed his face at "to begin with." "That was not the arrangement as I understood it," he said. "No," Abigail said. "I expect it wasn't." A pause. "So she sent you here under false pretenses," he said. Abigail thought about the dining room, about Margaret's face, about "my patience has a limit." "I believe," she said carefully, "that Mrs. Bellamy had more than one goal in this arrangement. Some of those goals she shared with you. Some she did not." Whitmore was quiet for a moment. "And you were aware of this," he said. "I became aware of it last night," she said, "when I was informed I would be leaving this morning." "And you came anyway." "I had limited alternatives." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked to the chair across from hers and sat down. He set his hands on his knees and looked at her with that direct, unapologetic attention. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you know how to do." Abigail sat down. She folded her hands in her lap, and she told him. She told him about the accounts, about the 6 years of keeping books for a household that was better at spending than it was at earning. She told him about the crop rotations she'd tracked in the Carter fields when Clifton had been too lazy to bother. She told him about the household management, the provisioning the staff, scheduling the maintenance log she'd kept for 3 years in a notebook that Margaret probably hadn't noticed, because Margaret didn't notice things that didn't involve money or status. She talked for 7 minutes without stopping. When she stopped, Whitmore was still looking at her with that same direct attention. "Who taught you the accounts?" he said. "My father," she said. And after he died, I taught myself. Taught yourself how? Books, she said. And trial and error. More error at first. The crop rotation records, he said. Those were your own initiative. Someone had to, she said. A pause. He looked at the window, then back at her. I have a steward, he said. Henry Pell. He manages the farm accounts. He's competent but overextended. I've taken on 2 additional parcels this year, and his workload has outrun his hours. He paused. The household I've been managing between Dolly and myself since April, which is not a long-term solution. No, Abigail agreed. The Richmond visitor arrives the 18th of August, he said. The household needs to be in order before then. Staffing provisions, guest accommodations, formal dinner arrangements. I can do that, Abigail said. He looked at her. I'm aware you can, he said. That's not the question I'm asking. Abigail looked back at him. What question are you asking? She said. Whether you intend to stay past August, he said. I won't offer a position and have it walked away from before the work is finished. I've had enough of arrangements that collapse in the middle. Abigail thought about the bag upstairs. $4.60. Her mother's Bible. The 4 pencils and the folded paper. She thought about Clifton on the porch, saying you'll be back inside a week with that satisfied verdict face. Mr. Whitmore, she said, I have nowhere to go back to. So unless you give me a reason to leave, I intend to stay. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once. Then we understand each other, he said. Dolly will show you where you'll be staying. I'll have Henry Pell meet with you tomorrow morning. You'll need to understand the full scope of what needs to be done before August. He stood. She stood. He looked at her one more time, that same measuring, unvarnished look. I expect you to tell me if something is beyond your capacity, he said. I expect you to believe me when I say it isn't, she said. Something moved across his face. She couldn't be certain, but she thought it might have been the beginning of respect. That first week inside Whitmore Manor was the hardest of Abigail's life, and she had lived through some hard weeks, not because anyone was cruel to her. Dolly was brisk and fair, and accepted Abigail's presence with the pragmatic grace of a woman who had too much work and not enough hands. The 2 household girls, Nell and Bess, sisters from a family outside town, were shy at first, but warmed quickly once they understood Abigail was not going to give them orders they didn't deserve. Henry Pell, the steward, was a balding, harried man in his 50s who looked at her across the estate ledgers on that first morning with an expression that was equal parts skepticism and desperate hope. You actually know what you're looking at, he said, pushing the ledger toward her. She pulled it closer. She spent 4 minutes reading. You've got a quarterly entry from March that doesn't reconcile with your February supply costs, she said. Either you overpaid for the seed purchase, or this income figure is wrong. Henry stared at her. The income figure, he said. I miscalculated the parcel rental. By $12. By $12, he confirmed. I didn't say anything else for a moment. Then he pushed his chair back slightly, like a man making room. All right, he said. Where do you want to start? The work was real, and it was extensive. The household was large. The August visit was important, and 6 months of operating without a proper housekeeper had left things in a state that was functional but not formal, dinner ready. Abigail made lists. She made lists of the lists she needed to make. She walked every room in the house twice in the first 2 days with a piece of folded paper and a pencil stub, cataloging what needed attention and in what order. The formal dining room needed 2 chair rails repaired and the silverware properly inventoried. The guest rooms needed linen assessments, and 2 of the mattresses needed replacing. The summer kitchen needed a thorough cleaning and a provisioning plan for the August menu. The front drive needed the drainage ditch cleared before the first fall rains. She brought her list to Whitmore at the end of the 2nd day. Howe was in the study, a room she had not yet been in, but which she had been told he used in the evenings. She knocked. Come in. He was at the desk reading something. He looked up when she came in, and then looked at the paper she was holding. Sit down, he said. She sat in the chair across from the desk. She handed him the list. He read it. He read it twice. He turned the paper over, saw the notes she'd continued on the back, and read those too. "The drainage ditch," he said. "It'll flood the drive in the first hard rain," she said. "If your Richmond visitor arrives in wet weather." He set the paper down. "The mattresses. You want to replace both. The guest mattresses are both in poor condition. If your visitor is elderly or has any joint difficulty—" "He's 63 and had a musket ball through his hip in '78, Whitmore said. "So yes." "Then both," Abigail said. He looked at the list again. "This is a significant expense," he said, "before August." "Yes," she said. "And you believe all of it is necessary." "I believe," she said, "that if someone of importance is coming to this house, the house should be worth coming to." He looked at her over the paper. "That's not an answer to my question," he said. "The answer to your question is yes," she said. "All of it is necessary. You can defer the drainage ditch if you want to take the risk. You cannot defer the mattresses." He set the paper down. He looked at her with that direct measuring attention that she was beginning to understand was simply how he looked at things he was taking seriously. "All right," he said. He picked up a pen and made a notation on the paper. "I'll speak to Pell about the budget," he said. "The silverware inventory, you should do that yourself. Pell loses count." "I'll do it tomorrow," she said. She stood to leave. "Miss Carter." She stopped. "The list is thorough," he said. He wasn't looking at her when he said it. He was looking at the paper still. "It's the most organized assessment of this house I've seen in 4 years." She absorbed that. "Thank you," she said. She walked out of the study. In the hallway outside, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then she straightened her shoulders and went to find Dolly to talk about the provisioning plan. The town found out she was there by the end of the first week. She didn't know how she hadn't been into town, had no occasion to go, but by Friday morning, when Dolly went to the market for the weekly supplies, she came back with her lips pressed together and a specific kind of silence that Abigail recognized as someone deciding whether to tell you something. "What?" Abigail said. Dolly set her market basket on the table. She took longer than necessary arranging the items from it. "There's talk," she said. "About me. About you being here." Dolly paused. "Mrs. Bellamy's been in town. She's been speaking to people." Abigail's hands went still on the edge of the table. "What kind of speaking?" she said. "The kind that's presented as concern," Dolly said. "She's telling people she's worried about you, that you arrived here under circumstances she didn't intend, that Mr. Whitmore may have—" She stopped. "May have what?" Abigail said. Dolly finally looked at her. "She's telling people that you were sent here as a joke," Dolly said. "That she arranged it as a kind of prank. That she never actually expected Mr. Whitmore to keep you on. And that the fact that he has suggests that you've—" She stopped again, clearly searching for a version of the words that would be easier. "That I've trapped him somehow," Abigail said flatly. Dolly didn't deny it. Abigail stood very still. She thought about Margaret. About the pleasant, composed face. About my patience has a limit. About the dining room and the $4.60 and the walk to the road without looking back. "She told people it was a joke," Abigail said. "That's what's going around," Dolly said quietly. Abigail took a long breath. She picked up her pencil. She looked at the provisioning list on the table in front of her. "Then I suppose," she said, "that the best thing I can do is make sure it isn't." She went back to the list. She did not let her hand shake. That evening, she was in the still room cataloging the preserves, part of the August provisioning assessment, when she heard the front door, and then Whitmore's voice in the hallway, and then another voice she didn't recognize. She stayed where she was. It wasn't her business. But then Dolly came to the still room doorway and said quietly, "You should know. Mr. Whitmore's just had a caller, James Rourke from town. He's the kind of man who makes it his business to pass along what he's heard." Abigail looked at her. "And what has he heard?" she said. "What Mrs. Bellamy has been saying," Dolly said. Abigail set down the jar she was holding. She listened. She could hear the voices from the front room, not the words, just the tone. Rourke's voice moving quickly, the way men's voices moved when they were delivering information they expected to be received with gratitude. And Whitmore's voice slower, quieter, giving nothing. Then the front door. Then silence. Then Whitmore appeared in the still room doorway. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I imagine you've heard what's being said in town," he said. "Dolly told me," she said. He was quiet a moment. "You could have left this morning when you heard," he said. "Saved yourself the difficulty." "I could have," she said. "I chose not to." "Why?" She looked at him directly. "Because I haven't done anything wrong," she said. "And I'm not inclined to run from a situation I didn't create." He held her gaze. Something shifted in his face, that same unreadable thing that had moved across it during their first meeting, the one she still couldn't name precisely. "Mrs. Bellamy will be coming here," he said. "She sent word this afternoon. She wants to discuss the arrangement. I expect she'll want to take you back with her." Abigail felt something cold and clear move through her chest. "And," she said. "And nothing," he said. "You work here. She has no standing to remove you. But you should know it's coming." He looked at her a moment longer. "You did good work this week," he said. "The pantry inventory was right." Then he turned and walked back down the hallway, that deliberate, careful step carrying him away from her. Abigail stood in the still room for a long moment. Then she turned back to the shelves. She had preserves to catalog. She had August to prepare for. She had a position she had earned in a house that had offered her a place before she'd asked for one. Margaret Bellamy could come. Let her come. Abigail Carter was not going anywhere. Margaret Bellamy arrived on a Tuesday. Abigail knew she was coming. Whitmore had told her as much, but knowing a thing is coming and standing still while it arrives are two different kinds of courage, and Abigail had spent the days between learning which one she was actually made of. She had kept working. That was the only answer she had. She cataloged the silver on Saturday and found 3 pieces missing from the formal set that Henry Pell had listed as present. She organized the linen closet on Sunday and discovered that 2 of the guest room sets had been stored damp and needed immediate attention before they mildewed beyond saving. She met with Dolly each morning to go through the provisioning plan for August, and each afternoon she sat with Henry Pell over the estate accounts and worked through the backlog that had built up since spring. Henry had stopped looking at her with skepticism by the 3rd day. By the end of the first week he had taken to bringing his coffee to her side of the table and pointing at entries he wasn't sure about before she had to find them herself. "This parcel rental," he said on Monday morning, pushing the ledger toward her. "Eastern acreage. The agreement was signed in March, but I can't reconcile the payment schedule." Abigail looked at it. She looked at it for about 40 seconds. "The payment schedule is on a different cycle than your other rentals," she said. "Quarterly instead of monthly. So March, June, September, December. You've been expecting May payment that wasn't contracted." Henry stared at the entry. "Lord," he said. "It's an easy mistake," she said. "I've been sending letters to the tenant," he said with a horror in his voice that had nothing to do with the money. "Formal letters." "I know," she said. "I found the copies." He put his face in his hands briefly. She pulled the ledger toward her and made a notation. I'll draft a correction," she said. "Under your name. We'll send it with an apology for the confusion and note that the June payment was received on time." He looked at her between his fingers. "You'd do that," he said. "The man paid on schedule," she said. "He deserves a letter that says so." Henry took his face out of his hands. He looked at her with an expression she was starting to recognize. It was the face people made when something they had been bracing against turned out to be something else entirely. "Mr. Whitmore made a good decision," he said quietly. "He made a practical one," she said, and went back to the ledger. She was still at the ledger table on Tuesday morning when Dolly appeared in the doorway of the estate office with her apron twisted in her hands, which was how Abigail knew, before Dolly said a single word, that Margaret Bellamy had arrived. "She's in the front room," Dolly said, "with her son. Clifton. Of course." Abigail set her pencil down flat. She smoothed the front of her dress. She stood up. "Is Mr. Whitmore there?" she said. He came in from the North Fields when he saw the carriage, Dolly said. He's in there now. Abigail nodded once. She walked to the front room. She heard Margaret's voice before she reached the door. That smooth, carrying tone that didn't need to be loud to fill a room. Only concerned for the girl's welfare, Mr. Whitmore. Naturally. She's family to us in her way, and given the circumstances of her arrival here, I feel responsible. Abigail pushed open the door and walked in. Margaret stopped talking. Clifton, who had been standing near the window with his hat in his hands, straightened up in the way men did when they were trying to look like they hadn't been caught at something. Whitmore was standing near the fireplace, arms crossed, wearing the expression Abigail had come to understand was his default setting for situations he found profoundly unconvincing. He looked at Abigail when she came in. I didn't say anything, but something in the line of his shoulders shifted, barely perceptible, just a fraction, and she understood that he was glad she was there. Abigail, Margaret said. She had the warmth in her voice that she reserved for performances. You look well. I am well, Abigail said. She stayed near the door. She did not move to embrace her stepmother, and Margaret did not move toward her, and the distance between them said everything neither of them was going to say out loud. We've come to see how you're settling, Margaret said, and to discuss the arrangement. There's nothing to discuss, Abigail said. The arrangement is between me and Mr. Whitmore. Margaret's pleasant expression held, but something behind her eyes went cooler. You're part of my household, Margaret said. Any arrangement involving you concerns me. I was part of your household, Abigail said. You sent me here. I arranged an opportunity for you, Margaret said. One that was meant to be temporary. You arranged a joke, Abigail said. The room went very quiet. Margaret's face didn't move, but Clifton flinched, which was more reaction than Abigail had expected from him. I beg your pardon, Margaret said. You told people it was a joke, Abigail said. That you sent me here knowing I'd be turned away. That you expected to watch me come home in disgrace. She kept her voice even. She had practiced keeping her voice even. That's what's being said in town. That's what you've been saying. Margaret looked at Whitmore. It was a social calculation, the kind that expected a man in his position to redirect the conversation, to smooth things over, to step in and manage the discomfort the way men of his standing typically did. Whitmore didn't move. He watched Abigail. I was protecting your reputation, Margaret said, turning back to her. Given the talk that's already started about your presence here, it seemed better to get ahead of it, Abigail said, by starting it yourself. Another silence. Abigail. Margaret's voice had gone from warm to careful. You don't understand the full situation. I understand the ledger, Abigail said. That landed. She watched it land. She watched Margaret's careful composure do something she had rarely seen. It flickered. Just once, just briefly, like a candle flame in a draft. Then it steadied. But the flicker had happened, and both of them knew it. I don't know what you mean, Margaret said. I think you do, Abigail said. And I think you know that I know. And I think that's the actual reason you sent me here. Clifton cleared his throat loudly. Now look, he said, stepping forward with the energy of a man who believed that his physical presence in a room constituted a form of authority. There's no need to make accusations. Mother came here in good faith. Clifton, Whitmore said. Just the name. Flat and quiet. Clifton stopped. Whitmore looked at Margaret. Mrs. Bellamy, he said. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd appreciate a direct answer. Margaret's composure had reassembled itself, but there was something different about it now. A tightness around the jaw that hadn't been there before. Of course, she said. Did you arrange to send Miss Carter here with the expectation that she would be refused and returned in a condition of public humiliation? He said. Margaret looked at him. Then she looked at Abigail. Then she smiled that composed, pleasant, impenetrable smile. I arranged an opportunity, she said. What she made of it was up to her. Whitmore held her gaze for a long moment. Then she made something of it, he said. And she'll be staying. The pleasant smile didn't waver, but Margaret stood very still. I see, she said. I expect, Whitmore said, that the talk in town will settle itself. People generally find more interesting things to discuss than a household manager doing her job. He paused. If the talk doesn't settle, that'll tell me something useful about who's keeping it alive. The message was as clear as if he'd said it outright. Margaret smoothed the front of her dress. "Well," she said, "I'm glad to hear Abigail has found a useful position." She glanced at Abigail with an expression that was still warm on the surface and completely cold underneath. "I do hope you'll write." "Of course," Abigail said. She held the door open. Margaret and Clifton left. Whitmore didn't say anything for a moment after they were gone. He stayed near the fireplace and looked at the middle distance, which was the expression he wore when he was working something out. "You said ledger," he said finally. "Yes," Abigail said. "You didn't mean mine," he said. "No." He looked at her. "The Carter accounts," he said. "Margaret has managed my father's estate since he died," Abigail said. "I've been keeping my own record of what I observed, not proof, not yet, but enough to know that what's been reported and what's been spent don't agree." Whitmore was quiet. "That's why she sent you away," he said. "That's why she needed me gone," Abigail said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Henry Pell was in the war with your father's attorney," he said. "Thomas Webb. Did you know that?" Abigail stared at him. "No," she said. "I didn't know that was relevant until about 3 minutes ago," he said. He moved toward the study doorway. "Come with me." She followed him. Inside the study, he pulled a document from the bottom drawer of the desk. It was a survey. She recognized the format, the county seal at the top, the hand-drawn boundaries. He laid it flat on the desk. She looked at it and felt the floor shift under her feet. It was the northern parcel, the 23 acres, her mother's bottomland. But the name on the survey was wrong. The name on the survey was Bellamy. "This was filed in April," Whitmore said, "with the county register. It came across my desk last week because it borders my northeastern property line, and I review any filings that touch my land." He looked at her. "I didn't know the history of it until you told me about your father's estate that first day." Abigail looked at the survey. She looked at the name. "She filed it," Abigail said. "She actually filed it." 3 weeks before she sent you here," Whitmore said. 3 weeks. 3 weeks before she sent Abigail away. When she had already done it, already taken what she was taking, already moved it into her own name with the county seal to make it official. When the ledger entries Abigail had been quietly tracing had already been covered over by a legal document that would make them look like nothing, because why would anyone suspect fraud when the ownership was already settled? She had been getting rid of a witness. That was all. That was the whole of it. Abigail sat down in the chair across from the desk without being invited to. She sat down because her legs had made the decision before her mind caught up. "She needed me gone," Abigail said again. Her voice sounded strange to her, flat. "Before you found enough to say something," Whitmore said. She looked at the survey. "Is this legal?" she said. "Can she do this?" "If your father's deed was never finalized," he said slowly, "and she had standing as the estate manager and presented the county register with documentation showing the land was unregistered." He stopped. "Possibly. It depends on what documentation she used, and whether any of it was falsified." Abigail thought about the ledger entries, the ones she'd found but hadn't been able to prove, the ones she'd left alone because she didn't have enough yet. "I kept notes," she said. "Notes aren't enough," he said. "I know that," she said, "but notes are a starting place." He looked at her across the desk. "Miss Carter," he said, "you came here with 4 days' notice, no invitation, and the understanding that you were being arranged like furniture. And you're sitting here talking about starting places." "What else would I do?" she said. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, that thing she still couldn't quite name. Only now it was clearer, closer to the surface. Something that had to do with recognition. The way you looked at something when you realized it was different from what you'd been expecting, and the difference was unexpectedly better. "Nothing," he said quietly. I reckon there's nothing else you'd do." He pulled the survey off the desk and folded it. "I'm going to write to Thomas Webb," he said. "Your father's attorney. There are questions about that filing that should be answered on the record." "He's in Richmond," Abigail said. "I have connections in Richmond," he said. It was said without any weight, just a fact, but she felt the reality of it, who he was, what he could do, the reach that came with the kind of standing he had in this county. "Why would you do that?" she said. He looked at her. "Because a fraud was committed," he said, "and it borders my property, and because—" He stopped. He seemed to consider the rest of that sentence more carefully than he'd considered the first two. "Because it's the right thing to do." She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just keep doing your job." She stood. She went back to the estate office. She sat down at the ledger table and picked up her pencil and stared at the page for about 2 minutes, seeing none of it. Then she turned to a fresh page and started writing down everything she remembered. The days after Margaret's visit settled into something Abigail had not expected: a rhythm. Real rhythms were hard to come by in her experience. She had lived reactively for 6 years inside the Bellamy house, waking up and assessing which version of the day she was going to get before she did anything else. Here there was no assessment needed. The work was what it was. The household needed what it needed. She learned where things were and where they should be, and how the estate ran in the early morning versus the late afternoon. She learned which of the outbuilding staff came to Dolly with problems, and which came to Henry, and which increasingly came to her. She learned that Whitmore rode the northern property line every morning before breakfast, that he ate the same thing, 2 eggs and bread, black coffee every day, and seemed to consider variety an unnecessary complication, that he was harder on himself than he was on anyone who worked for him, which she observed in small ways, the way he would take a task back rather than assign it to someone who was already overworked. The way he limped worse at the end of a long day, but never acknowledged it. She learned that he was not a man who spoke much, but that when he did speak, he meant what he said. That was rarer than it should have been. She had known too many men who used words the way Margaret used pleasantness, as a surface, as a management tool, as something placed between themselves and what was actually true. She did not examine how much she valued it. She was a practical woman, and she had practical priorities. But she noticed. 3 weeks into August, with 4 days before the Richmond visitor was due to arrive, Abigail found something in the estate accounts she had not been looking for. She was cross-referencing the provender records with Henry's supply entries routine work, nothing she expected to be interesting when she found a set of quarterly payments going back 18 months to a surveying firm in Charlottesville. She found them because they were entered under farm maintenance, which they were not. She looked at the firm's name. She looked at the amounts. She looked at the dates. The first payment predated the survey of the northern parcel by 6 months. She sat with that for a long time. Then she closed the ledger. She went to find Whitmore. He was in the barn with the head groom, looking at the near horse's foreleg with the focused attention of a man who had already decided he wasn't going to like what the farrier told him. He looked up when she came in. She said, "I need to speak with you." He looked at her face. He said something quiet to the groom and came toward her. "Now," he said. "Yes," she said. They walked to the study. She told him what she'd found. He listened without interrupting, which was something she had come to rely on. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You're saying they used my surveying account," he said. "I'm saying someone made payments to a Charlottesville survey firm from your estate accounts," she said carefully. "Those payments begin 6 months before the northern parcel survey, the survey that's now filed under the Bellamy name." "Through my accounts," he said again. Flat. "Your accounts or someone with access to them," she said. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she could see the line of his shoulders and the way his hands had gone still at his sides, and she understood that this was not simply surprise. This was something that had a specific quality to it, the quality of something you had trusted without knowing you were trusting it and had just been told was wrong. "Henry," he said. Not an accusation, a question. "I don't think it was Henry," she said. The entries are too clean. Henry's accounting has a particular style, and these don't match it. They're too practiced. Who else had access? He said. Before April, she said carefully. Before I arrived. He turned. He looked at her. My previous steward, he said. He left in January. Did he leave or was he asked to leave? She said. A pause. Encouraged, Whitmore said. There were irregularities I couldn't pin down at the time. He sat back down. He put his hands flat on the desk. She watched him think. She had learned the shape of his thinking. By now, the stillness of it, the way it moved through him without showing much on the surface except in the set of his jaw. Abigail, he said. She went still when he said her name. He hadn't used it before. It was always Miss Carter. She wasn't sure he'd even noticed the shift. If my previous steward was in Margaret Bellamy's employ, he said, and used access to my accounts to fund a fraudulent survey. She could claim the land was never properly Carter property, Abigail finished, and that the survey only confirmed existing ambiguity. The payments through your accounts give her a paper trail that implicates you in the transaction. The study was very quiet. Outside, one of the horses moved in the yard, and the lead chain clinked against the post. She implicated me, he said. I don't know if she intended to use it, Abigail said, or only meant it as a safeguard, something to muddy the water if anyone asked questions. Something that would make it look like I'd arranged the survey myself, he said. Yes. He was silent for a long moment. She didn't expect you to stay, he said. No. She didn't expect you to find this, he said. No, Abigail said. I reckon she thought I'd either be sent away immediately or kept too busy with domestic work to look at the estate accounts. He looked at her. She miscalculated, he said. She did, Abigail said. Something moved across his face. This time she could read it better. She had been reading him long enough now that she was starting to understand what lived under the surface of that composed, guarded expression. It wasn't simply respect. It was something warmer than that, though he'd probably not have put a name to it out loud, any more than she was doing right now. I need to send an express rider to Thomas Webb tonight, he said. I'll write the summary of what I found, she said. So you have documentation. Can you have it done in an hour, he said. In 40 minutes, she said. He almost smiled. It wasn't a full smile. It was barely the suggestion of one, a shift in the line of his mouth, so slight that she might have imagined it. But she didn't think she'd imagined it. She went to the estate office. She sat down. She wrote the summary in 35 minutes and brought it back to him and watched him read it with that focused, thorough attention he gave to things that mattered. This is good, he said. The documentation will need to be formal, she said. This is just a starting place for Webb to. I said it's good, he said. I meant it. She looked at him. He looked back at her. In the 6 years she had spent inside the Bellamy household, she had been called useful and unremarkable, and occasionally in the way. She had been told her opinions were unnecessary, and her questions were above her station, and her presence was tolerated out of generosity. She had not in 6 years been looked at the way Nathaniel Whitmore looked at her when he said something he meant. Like she was exactly as capable as she was. Not more. Not less. Exactly. She stood. I'll finish the dining room inventory tonight, she said. Your visitor arrives Friday. I know, he said. She left. She walked back to the estate office and sat down and put her hands flat on the table for a moment. Then she picked up her pencil. She had work to do. Thomas Webb's reply came on Thursday. The express rider arrived at mid-morning, and Whitmore took the letter in the hallway and carried it to the study without reading it in front of the rider, which told her something about how he managed information. She was in the kitchen with Dolly going over the final menu when he appeared in the doorway. Miss Carter, he said. Dolly looked at Abigail. Abigail set down the menu sheet. She followed him to the study. He had the letter open on the desk. He didn't hand it to her. He turned it to face her so she could read it herself. She stood over it and read. Webb's letter was careful in the way of attorneys who were not yet sure what they were dealing with. It acknowledged the survey filing. It stated that as your father's attorney of record, he had not been consulted in the filing process and had in fact not been aware that the parcel had been surveyed at all. It stated that the estate documentation he had on file showed the northern acreage as part of the original Carter grant, and that the absence of a formal deed filing had been a procedural oversight intended to be corrected. And then, at the bottom, in a postscript that had clearly been added after the body of the letter was composed 3 sentences. I should inform you that I received a visit from Mrs. Bellamy in June. She presented me with what she claimed was a settlement agreement signed by Elias Carter prior to his death, conveying the northern parcel to her estate in lieu of a debt. I told her I had no record of such an agreement. She left without the document. Abigail read those 3 sentences twice. Then she straightened up. She felt very calm. It was the kind of calm that came not from peace, but from certainty. The solid, specific feeling of something you had suspected becoming something you knew. She tried to get Webb to authenticate a forged document, she said. And he refused, Whitmore said. She still filed the survey, Abigail said. Without Webb's endorsement, he said. Which means the filing is built on a document she doesn't have legal support for. He paused. Webb will know what to do with this. He'll take it to the county register. She'll fight it, Abigail said. She can try, Whitmore said. He folded the letter. He looked at her. Your father's land, he said. Not a question. My father's land, she said. We're going to get it back, he said. The certainty in his voice was so plain and so steady that she felt something crack open in her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been holding shut. It was a small crack, just a seam, but something came through it, something that had been kept carefully compressed for a very long time. She looked at the surface of the desk. She pressed her lips together. Abigail, he said, quietly. She looked up. I know, he said. That was all, just that. But it landed differently than she would have expected from a man who spoke as little as he did. It landed like something true. She nodded once. She took a breath. Your Richmond visitor arrives tomorrow morning, she said. He does, Whitmore said. The house is ready, she said. He looked around the study, as if for the first time registering what she had done with the place, the papers organized, the lamp cleaned, the side table properly set. He looked the way people looked when they had been surrounded by good work long enough that they'd stopped tracking the individual pieces of it. I see that, he said. The dining room is set for 12, she said. Dolly has the menu under control. Neil patched the guest mattresses and the linen is done. She paused. You should get some sleep. You've been riding the North Field every morning this week at 5. He looked at her. That's my business, he said. It's my business if you fall asleep at the dinner table, she said, in front of your Richmond guest. A pause. That's fair, he said. There was something in his voice barely there, just a thread of it that she would have called amusement on a different kind of man. She turned to leave. Miss Carter, he said. She stopped. What you found in those accounts, he said. What you're doing with Webb. None of that is in your job description. She looked at him. No, she said. But it needed doing. I'm aware, he said. I want you to know I'm aware. She held his gaze for a moment. Then that's enough, she said. She walked out. In the hallway she passed Dolly coming from the kitchen with her hands full of linens, and Dolly looked at her face and then looked a second time. You all right? Dolly said. Yes, Abigail said. You look... Dolly searched for it. Like something just got decided. Abigail thought about the letter. About the 3 sentences coming up every spring along the edge of the bottomland, out of sheer stubbornness. Because that was what growing things did. When they were planted in good soil, they kept coming back. Something did, she said. She took one end of the linen stack from Dolly. They went to finish preparing the house. Senator Harold Greer of Richmond was not what Abigail had expected. She had built an expectation from fragments. Whitmore's brief descriptions. Henry's nervous energy in the days leading up to the visit. Dolly's insistence that the good china come out, and nothing less. She had assembled a picture of a formal man, imperious, the kind of man who arrived and immediately began assessing whether the hospitality met his standard. Harold Greer arrived with mud on his boots, a laugh that rattled the front windows, and an immediate demand to know who had organized the dining room, because it was the finest arrangement he'd seen outside of Philadelphia. Whitmore looked at Abigail. Abigail said, "I did, sir," and Greer shook her hand like she'd done him a personal favor. How was 63 broad-shouldered with white hair, and the kind of direct measuring eyes that she recognized. They were the same quality as Whitmore's, that particular sharpness that came from spending decades making decisions that mattered. He had served in the Continental Congress in his younger years. He had land holdings across 3 states. She understood quickly exactly the kind of man who would be useful to know if you were trying to navigate a county filing dispute. She filed that away and said nothing about it. The dinner that first evening went well. She knew it was going well because Dolly came to the kitchen doorway twice to give her the look that meant everything is holding together, and because the conversation from the dining room stayed animated for 2 hours without any of the silences that signaled discomfort. She ate in the kitchen with Dolly and Nell, which was practical, and also she admitted to herself a relief. 12 people at a formal dinner required managing from the outside, not participating in. After dinner, she was in the still room going through the next day's menu when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Not Whitmore's, she knew his step by now, that deliberate, careful rhythm. These were lighter, quicker. Greer appeared in the doorway. He looked at her with those sharp eyes and said, "Mind if I come in?" "It's your host's still room," she said. "I don't have standing to refuse you." He laughed that window-rattling laugh and came in and leaned against the doorframe with the ease of a man who was comfortable everywhere. "Nathaniel tells me you've been running this household for 3 weeks," he said. "I have," she said. "He also tells me," Greer said, "that you found an irregularity in his estate accounts that implicates a surveying firm and a fraudulent land filing." She looked at him. "He told you that," she said. "He did," Greer said. "Nathaniel doesn't tell people things unless he wants them to know, so I reckon he wanted me to know." He paused. "I sit on the Virginia Land Commission, have for 11 years. The still room was quiet. She set down what she was holding. "Then you understand what I found," she said. "I understand it better than most," he said. "And I understand that a fraudulent survey filing, if it can be documented, is a serious matter." He looked at her steadily. "How much do you have?" "Webb's letter," she said. "My own records going back 3 years. The estate account entries that show payments to the survey firm. And the original Carter documentation that Webb has on file." "And the alleged settlement agreement," Greer said. "The one Mrs. Bellamy presented to Webb." "She didn't leave a copy," Abigail said. "Webb has nothing in writing from that visit except his own notes." Greer nodded slowly. "She'll produce it at some point," he said. "When she realizes the filing is being challenged. And when she produces it," Abigail said, "it'll be a forgery." "Probably," Greer said. "But forgeries need to be proved. That takes time, and it takes resources." He looked at her. "Resources that a woman in your position don't have," she said. "Not on your own," he said. He paused. "Miss Carter, may I speak plainly?" "Please," she said. "Nathaniel Whitmore is one of the most respected men in this county," Greer said. "He is also one of the most stubborn. In 20 years of knowing him, I have watched him tolerate incompetence, dishonesty, and outright disrespect from people whose good opinion he didn't need and whose bad opinion didn't concern him, because tolerating those things cost him less than the fight." He paused. "I have never in 20 years seen him do what he did tonight." She looked at him. "What did he do tonight?" she said. "He told 12 people at his dinner table," Greer said, "that his household manager had identified a fraud that may be connected to a larger pattern of land manipulation in this county. He said it plainly with her name and with the clear expectation that those 12 people would take it seriously." He held her gaze. "Those 12 people have standing in this state, Miss Carter. What Nathaniel said tonight was not accidental." She stood very still. "I was building a record," she said. "He was building a coalition," Greer said. "There's a difference." She looked at the still-room shelves, at the rows of preserves and dried herbs, at the evidence of a household that had been brought back into working order, one careful task at a time. She thought about Whitmore at the dinner table saying her name in a room full of people who had standing. She thought about what it had cost him. To be that unambiguous. To stake his reputation on hers. "He should have told me," she said. "He probably should have," Greer agreed. "He's not always good at telling people things that might sound like he's doing them a kindness. It makes him uncomfortable." He straightened up from the doorframe. "But I've been watching that man at dinner tables for 20 years, and I know what it looks like when he's decided something matters." He paused. "You matter, Miss Carter. To the case, yes. But I don't think only to the case." He nodded to her and walked back down the hallway. She stayed in the still room for a long time after that. She found Whitmore on the back porch later that night. The house was quiet. Greer and the other overnight guests had gone to their rooms. Dolly had finished in the kitchen. Abigail had told herself she was going to check the water pitcher in the east guest room, and she had checked it and then walked past the study and seen the door open and no light inside, and kept walking until she reached the back door. And there he was, standing in the dark, with his arms on the porch railing, looking out at the property he had worked for 20 years. She came outside. He didn't turn around, but she knew he heard her. "Senator Greer told me what you said at dinner," she said. A pause. "I expected he would," Whitmore said. "You should have told me first," she said. "I know," he said. "It wasn't your decision to make," she said. "Not alone." "You're right," he said. She waited for the explanation, for the justification, for the version men usually offered when they had done something without consulting a woman and been called on it. The version that made the oversight sound like consideration, like protection, like something done for your benefit that you simply hadn't recognized. He didn't offer one. He said, "I made a decision that involved you without asking you first. That was wrong." She stood with that for a moment. "All right," she said. "I won't do it again," he said. "See that you don't," she said. He was quiet a moment. "Greer wants to take the documentation to the Land Commission," he said. "A formal filing challenge. It'll go to a hearing." "When?" she said. "September most likely," he said. "He's moving quickly because he's been watching this county for 2 years. He thinks Margaret Bellamy isn't the only person using survey manipulation to claim unregistered land. He thinks she's part of a pattern." Abigail's breath went out of her slowly. A pattern. Not just her father's land. Not just her. "How many parcels?" she said. "He doesn't know yet," Whitmore said. "That's part of what the hearing will establish." She gripped the railing. "She didn't just steal from me," she said. "She was part of something larger." "It looks that way," he said. "And Clifton," she said. Not a question. "And probably the former steward who manipulated my accounts," he said. The night was warm and very still. Somewhere off in the distance, a barn owl was hunting its call, cutting the dark in clean intervals. "I need to be at that hearing," she said. "I know," he said. "I need to be the one who presents the documentation," she said. "Not through Webb, not through you, me, with my name on it." He turned to look at her then. She could see his profile in the faint light from the kitchen window, the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. "That will put you directly in front of the commission," he said, "with Margaret Bellamy and her attorney on the other side of the room." "Good," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. "You're not going to tell me it's inadvisable," she said. "No," he said. "You're not going to suggest I let Webb handle it." "No." "Why not?" she said. He turned back to the railing. "Because it's your land," he said, "and your name. And you're the most capable person in a 3-county radius when it comes to documentation and accounting." He paused. "Why would I suggest you let someone else do what you can do better?" She looked at the side of his face. That crack in her chest from 2 days ago, the seam that had opened when he said we're going to get it back, it widened now just slightly. Not enough to be dangerous, just enough to let the air in. "Thank you," she said. "Stop thanking me," he said. "I'll stop when you stop doing things worth thanking you for," she said. Something moved in his face, that almost smile barely there. She went inside. She did not sleep well that night, but it was not an unhappy kind of sleeplessness. It was the kind that came from having too many things to think about and not enough hours of dark to think them in. The Richmond party left on Saturday morning. Greer shook Abigail's hand again on the way out. He held it a moment longer than the first time. "September 15th, he said quietly. "That's the hearing date. You'll receive the formal notice through Webb." "I'll be ready," she said. He looked at her with those sharp measuring eyes. "I believe you," he said. The carriage rolled down the lane, and Abigail stood in the front drive until it turned onto the road, and then she turned back toward the house and nearly walked into Nathaniel Whitmore, who had come to stand behind her without her noticing. She stopped. He was closer than their usual working distance, and for a moment neither of them moved. "Sorry," she said, stepping back. "My fault," he said. He stepped to the side to give her room, and she watched him favor his right leg in the step, a quick redistribution of weight that he'd clearly done 10,000 times without thinking. "Didn't mean to crowd you." "You didn't," she said. A pause that lasted about 2 seconds too long for pure practicality. "The house held up well," he said. "It did," she said. "You did good work this week," he said. "So did Dolly," she said. "And Nell, and Henry. I'll tell them," he said. "But I'm telling you first." She looked at him. He looked back at her. Between them in the space that was neither too close nor far enough to be comfortable, something was happening that neither of them was naming. She was aware of it, the way you were aware of a change in weather. Before the clouds arrived, felt in the body, first understood by the mind, second, and not yet acknowledged out loud. "I have accounts to reconcile," she said. "I have the North Field to ride," he said. "Of course you do," she said. "You ride it every morning." "You noticed," he said. "I notice everything," she said. "It's how I do my job." He almost smiled again. "Go do your job, Miss Carter," he said. She went. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, 11 days before the hearing. It was not from Webb. It was not from Greer. It was addressed in Margaret Bellamy's careful, slanted hand, and it was delivered by a young man on horseback who waited for a reply. Abigail took the letter from Dolly, who had taken it from the young man, and carried it to the estate office, and sat down and opened it. It was 4 paragraphs long. The first paragraph expressed concern for Abigail's welfare and hoped she had been comfortable at Whitmore Manor. The second paragraph noted that Margaret had been made aware of certain legal proceedings that appeared to involve her family's property, and that she found this deeply troubling. The third paragraph said that Abigail had clearly been influenced by people who did not have her best interests at heart, and that Margaret was prepared to discuss a resolution that would protect Abigail's future if Abigail would meet with her before the hearing date. The fourth paragraph said that if Abigail did not meet with her before the hearing date, Margaret could not be responsible for what the proceedings might reveal about Abigail's character. Abigail read it 3 times. She folded it. She carried it to Whitmore's study. He read it once. He set it on the desk. "She's threatening you," he said. "She's trying to," Abigail said. "What does she think she has on your character?" he said. "I don't know," Abigail said. "But I know Margaret. She doesn't make threats she can't follow through on." She paused. "She has something. Or she thinks she does." "She's trying to get you to the table before the hearing," he said. "To settle privately. She knows that a private settlement protects her from the Land Commission investigation," Abigail said. "If I withdraw my documentation, Greer can still proceed, but without me as the primary witness, the case is weaker." "You're not withdrawing," Whitmore said. Not a question. "I'm not withdrawing," she said. "Then write her back," he said. "Tell her you've received her letter, and you'll see her at the hearing. That'll make her move faster," Abigail said. "Whatever she's holding, she'll use it before September 15th. "Let her," he said. "We deal with it when it comes." She looked at him. "You're very calm," she said. "One of us should be," he said. "I'm calm," she said. "You're controlled," he said. "That's not the same thing." He looked at her steadily. "You've been carrying this for 6 years, Abigail. The accounts, the ledger, the land. You've been carrying it alone and quietly, and without letting it show." She looked at the desk. "I didn't have another option," she said. "You do now," he said. The room was very quiet. She looked up. I was watching her with that direct, unguarded attention, the kind he didn't give to many people she had come to understand. The kind that meant you had been assessed and found worthy of the full weight of his regard. Write her back, he said quietly. And then go have dinner. Dolly made that apple cake you like. She laughed. It surprised her, the laugh coming out before she had decided to let it real and sudden and warm. She felt it in her whole chest. Whitmore looked at her when she laughed, like a man who had just seen something he hadn't known he was waiting for. She went to write the letter. Margaret Bellamy's response came in person. Not a letter. Not an intermediary. Margaret herself with Clifton and a man. Abigail didn't recognize middle-aged, well-dressed, carrying a leather case that meant attorney. They arrived on a Friday morning with no warning, and asked for both Abigail and Mr. Whitmore. Whitmore got there first. Abigail came from the estate office 2 minutes later, and stood in the doorway, and looked at the three of them arranged in the front room, like an ambush that had been dressed up as a visit. The attorney's name was Garfield Price. He was from Charlottesville, not Richmond, not Harlow County, somewhere in between. He had the smooth, careful manners of a man who made his living navigating the spaces between what was legal and what was right, and had long since stopped distinguishing between the two. Mr. Whitmore, Price said, we appreciate your time. We're here because we've become aware of certain claims being prepared for the September hearing, and we felt it important to address some factual misunderstandings before this goes further. Go ahead, Whitmore said. Price opened the leather case. He produced a document. He placed it on the table between them. Abigail looked at it from the doorway, and then crossed the room and looked at it up close, because she was not going to stand at a distance and receive this second-hand. It was a page of accounting records. Her handwriting. From the Carter household ledger. But the entries on the page, the ones in her handwriting, showed something she had not written. Payments that she had not recorded. Transfers that bore her pencil marks, but not her meaning. Someone had taken the pages she had corrected and found a way to make the corrections look like something else, like she had been managing the accounts not to fix them, but to conceal something. Her hands went still. Her face stayed flat. These records, Price said in the voice of a man performing reasonableness, appear to show a pattern of accounting irregularities in the Carter household going back 3 years. Irregularities in Miss Carter's handwriting. I kept those accounts, Abigail said. Indeed, Price said. Which is what makes them interesting. They've been altered, she said. Miss Carter. They've been altered, she said again, steadier. The original entries are mine, the additions are not. That will be difficult to prove, Price said. Possibly, she said. But I kept my own parallel record. She looked at Margaret. Did you know I kept a second record? Margaret's face didn't move. I kept it separately, Abigail said. In my room, in a notebook you probably thought was a diary. She looked at her stepmother. It's not a diary. Clifton made a sound that might have been a word. Price looked at her with the careful assessment of a man recalibrating. Even so, he said. The presentation of contested documents at a land commission hearing will create complications for all parties. There are ways to resolve this that don't require a public proceeding. Mrs. Bellamy is prepared to... No, Whitmore said. Price stopped. Mr. Whitmore, he said carefully. This is a matter between the Bellamy estate and Miss Carter, and perhaps it would be better. The fraudulent survey was funded through my estate accounts, Whitmore said, which makes it my matter too. He looked at Price with no particular heat, just the flat certainty of a man who had made a decision and was simply delivering it. This goes to the hearing. Miss Carter presents her documentation. The commission makes its determination. Price looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at Abigail. Abigail, Margaret said. That warm, smooth voice. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand exactly what I'm doing, Abigail said. You're going to stand in front of the Land Commission with documents that can be challenged, Margaret said, with a case that depends on your word against mine, against an attorney and witnesses and the official survey filing. She paused. You are an unmarried woman with no property and no legal standing. Do you understand how that looks? I understand how it looks, Abigail said. I also understand that I have Webb's letter, the estate account records, and 3 years of parallel documentation that shows every entry I ever made in your household, going back to the month your husband died." She looked at her stepmother. "Would you like to know what those records show about the northern parcel? About the money that moved through accounts 2 months before my father's death?" The room went absolutely still. Clifton looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at Abigail. For the first time in 6 years, Margaret Bellamy's composure did not simply flicker. It cracked. Something moved across her face that Abigail had never seen there before. It was not guilt. It was not remorse. It was fear. "I don't know what you think you found," Margaret said. "I found enough," Abigail said, "and the commission will find the rest." Price put his hand lightly on his client's arm, the practiced gesture of an attorney who understood when a meeting had stopped being productive. "We'll see you at the hearing," he said. They left. The door had barely closed when Whitmore turned to look at her. "2 months before your father's death," he said. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. She could feel them slightly unsteady at her sides, and she pressed them flat against her skirt. "You think she moved money before he died?" he said. "I think she knew his health was failing," Abigail said. "I think she started moving things before there was any legal process that would require documentation." She paused. "I can't prove that, not yet. But the dates are there. The commission will have to look at the dates." Whitmore was quiet. "What was in those records she brought?" he said. "The altered pages." "She found my corrections," Abigail said. "And she made them look like manipulation, like I was hiding transfers." She stopped. "She turned the evidence I'd been building against her into evidence against me." "But you have the parallel records," he said. "I have my notebook," she said, "with my handwriting and the original dates and entries." "Is it here?" he said. "Is it in this house?" She looked at him. "It's in my room," she said. Something passed through his face quickly. "Go get it," he said. "Now, put it with Webb's materials." She went. She took the stairs, quickly went to her room, opened the bottom of the trunk where the notebook lived under 2 folded shifts and her mother's Bible. She picked it up. It was a plain brown cover, worn soft at the corners. Her handwriting filled every page, small and precise. 3 years of what she'd seen, what she'd recorded, what she'd suspected. She held it in both hands. She thought about the night she had started it. 3 months after her father died, when she had understood that something was wrong and had no one to tell. When she had sat at the small desk in her room and written the first entry by candlelight, with the clarity of a woman who did not yet know what she was building, but knew she needed to build something. She went back downstairs. Whitmore was where she'd left him. She handed him the notebook. He took it and opened it. He read for a full 2 minutes without speaking. Then he closed it. He looked at her with something in his face that she had not seen before. Not the measuring attention, not the almost smile, not the steady regard that she had come to rely on. Something more exposed than any of those. Something that had no calculation in it at all. "Abigail," he said. "Yes," she said. "You have been—" He stopped. He seemed to be working something out internally the way he did when the words needed to be exact. "You have been carrying this completely alone." "Yes," she said. "For 3 years," he said. "Yes." "While living in her house," he said. "While she was using you. While you had no—" He stopped again. "While I had nothing," she said. "Yes." He held the notebook. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then, "She's not going to win this, Abigail. I want you to understand that. Whatever she brings to that hearing, whatever Price has prepared, she is not going to win." She looked at him. "You sound certain," she said. "I am certain," he said, "because I know what you've built here." He lifted the notebook slightly. "And because Greer has 11 years on the Land Commission, and he's seen this before, and he knows how to dismantle it." He paused. "And because I'll be there." "You'll be there," she said. "Standing next to you," he said, "if you'll allow it." She looked at the directness of it. At the complete absence of the social distance that men of his position usually maintained between themselves and uncertainty between themselves and exposure. He had put his reputation into that dinner table conversation. He was offering his standing now to stand beside her in a room full of people with power and make it plain that he was on her side. She understood what that cost him. She understood what it meant that he was willing to pay it. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. He held the notebook out to her. She took it. Their hands were close for a moment, not touching, just close in the way that two people's hands were close when they were passing something between them that mattered. Then she stepped back. "I need to write to Webb," she said. "He needs to know what happened this morning." "I'll write to Greer," he said. She nodded. She turned toward the estate office. "Abigail," he said. She stopped. "You said she looked afraid," he said. "When you mentioned the dates." "Yes," she said. "That means you have more than she thought," he said. "That's good. That's very good." She held that for a moment. "September 15th, she said. "We'll be ready," he said. She went to write the letter. Behind her, she heard him cross the hallway toward the study. That deliberate, careful step, unhurried and steady, as a man who had decided what mattered and was moving toward it. She sat down at the table. She opened the notebook one more time. She looked at the first entry written 3 years ago by candlelight in a house that had never been hers, in a hand that had been steady even then. She closed it. She picked up her pen. September 15th was 11 days away. She had work to do. The 11 days before the hearing were the longest of Abigail's life, and she had lived through some long stretches of time. She worked. That was the only way she knew to move through waiting, fill every hour with something that needed doing. So the hours stopped feeling like they were stacked against her. She finalized the August household accounts and began the September projections. She wrote 3 letters to Webb and received 2, back, each one tighter and more specific than the last, as the hearing date approached, and the documentation solidified into something that had shape and weight and legal coherence. Greer wrote from Richmond. His letter was short and to the point. The commission had received the formal challenge filing. The hearing was confirmed. 3 other land disputes had been pulled into the same session because of overlapping documentation. He was bringing 2 colleagues who specialized in survey law. He expected the hearing to run most of the day. She read that letter twice and then set it on the estate office table, with her hands flat on either side of it, and breathed. Most of the day. Most of a day, in front of men, with authority, with Margaret and Price on the other side of the room, with 3 years of careful, quiet work, either proving itself or being dismantled in front of witnesses. She was not afraid. She told herself she was not afraid. She was deeply, specifically afraid. She folded the letter and put it with the others and went back to the September accounts. That evening, Whitmore found her still at the estate office table at 8:30 when the rest of the house had gone quiet. He came to the doorway and looked at her with that steady, assessing attention. "You should sleep," he said. "I will," she said. "That's not an answer," he said. "That's a deflection." She looked up. He looked back at her without apology. "You've been in here since 6 this morning," he said. "The case is prepared. Webb has everything he needs. Greer has everything he needs. Working yourself into exhaustion 2 days before the hearing helps no one." "I keep finding things I should have included," she said. "Like what?" he said. She looked at the table. At the stack of papers, the notebook, the letters. "Like the timing of the previous steward's departure," she said. "He left in January. The payments to the survey firm started in October. I keep thinking there should be a record of communication between him and Margaret's attorney, and I can't find one." "Because you don't have access to his records," Whitmore said. "Or Margaret's." "No," she said. "Then you've documented everything you have access to," he said. "That's all you can do." "It might not be enough," she said. He crossed the room. He sat down in the chair across the table, Henry's usual chair, and he put his hands flat on the table and looked at her directly. "Abigail," he said, "tell me what you're actually afraid of." She looked at him. She almost gave him the practical answer: the documentation gaps, the contested records, the uncertainty of Price's strategy. Those were all real and all worth being afraid of. But he had asked what she was actually afraid of, and he said it in the voice he used when he wanted the real answer. That it won't matter, she said. That we'll walk into that room and present everything, and it'll be correct and thorough and irrefutable, and it still won't matter, because she has an attorney, and a filing, and a social position, and I'm what I am. She stopped. An unmarried woman with no property presenting contested accounting records against a filed legal document. And the men in that room will look at both sides and see what they've always seen. Not what's true, what they expect. The room was quiet. That's a real fear, he said. I know it is, she said. It's also not the whole picture, he said. Greer is not a man who sees what he expects. He's spent 11 years on that commission precisely because he has the uncommon capacity to see what's actually in front of him. He paused. And you will not be standing there alone. I know, she said. Do you? He said. She looked at him. There was something in his face right now, something past the usual composure, past the steady regard that she had come to rely on. Something that had been there for weeks, she realized, building. So gradually, she had almost not noticed it, the way you didn't notice a room warming until it was warm. You've been at this estate for 2 months, he said. You walked in here with a single bag and $4.60. Yes, Dolly told me, and you have rebuilt the household management, uncovered a fraud, documented it thoroughly enough to bring a case to the Land Commission, and done all of this while the woman who arranged your humiliation has been trying to undermine you from the outside. He paused. Whatever happens in that room on the 15th, Abigail, that is who you are. A courtroom determination doesn't change it. She looked at the table. Something in her chest was doing that thing again, the seam opening, the air coming through. You're telling me not to place my worth in the outcome, she said. I'm telling you I won't, he said. Whatever the outcome. She looked up. He held her gaze. Go to bed, he said quietly. You need to be sharp on Thursday. She went. Wednesday passed in a strange suspended quality, too slow and too fast at the same time. Webb arrived from Richmond on Wednesday evening and sat with Abigail for 2 hours at the estate office table, going through the complete case documentation in the methodical, deliberate way of an attorney who had been doing this for 30 years and had learned not to hurry the parts that mattered. How was a small, precise man with wire spectacles and the unhurried certainty of someone who understood that thorough preparation was the only kind worth having. He had brought her father's original estate documentation, the actual papers from the original Carter grant, which he had located in his Richmond files, and which showed the northern parcel clearly as part of the original property. He spread them on this table beside her parallel records and Webb's own notes from Margaret's June visit and the estate account entries and Greer's documentation of the survey firm. He looked at the assembled case. He said, "This is solid, Miss Carter." She said, "Is it enough?" He looked at her over the spectacles. "It should be," he said. "Whether it is depends on factors I can't fully control. But what you've built here..." He gestured at the documentation. "This is the work of someone who has been paying very close attention for a very long time." 3 years, she said. "It shows," he said. She looked at the papers. "She's going to produce the settlement document," Abigail said. "The alleged agreement my father signed." "She may," Webb said. "It's a forgery," Abigail said. "Almost certainly," Webb said. "But we'll need to prove that. I've brought 2 sample signatures from your father's legitimate correspondence. If Greer can get a handwriting examination authorized through the commission." "Can he?" she said. "He believes so," Webb said. "He's been moving very quickly on this." He paused. "Miss Carter, I want to ask you something directly." "Please," she said. "The entries in your parallel notebook," he said. "The ones from 2 months before your father's death." He looked at her carefully. "You believe she moved money knowing he was dying?" "I believe," Abigail said carefully, "that the timing of those transfers is not a coincidence." "But you cannot prove intent," he said. "No," she said. "Then we don't lead with it at the hearing," he said. "We let the commission see the dates and draw their own conclusions. If we assert it without proof, Price will make it look like grievance-motivated speculation." He paused. "Can you hold that back? Let the evidence speak." She thought about her father. About the last winter he'd been alive when she had known something was wrong, and had not yet known what it was, and had watched his health fail, and his attention drift, and Margaret's efficiency increase in inverse proportion. About the entries she had found in the weeks after his death that had made her sit very still for a long time with the ledger in her hands. "Yes," she said. "Good," Webb said. He stacked the papers with the precise, deliberate movements of a man putting something in order that mattered. "Get some sleep. I'll see you at 7 tomorrow morning." She did not get much sleep, but what she got was enough. The hearing was held at the Harlow County Courthouse, which was a building Abigail had passed 100 times and entered twice in her life, once to register her father's death and once to watch a neighbor's property dispute, resolved without satisfaction for either party. She arrived at 7:15 with Webb on one side and Whitmore on the other, which was not a configuration she had planned, but which had happened naturally. Whitmore had simply appeared at the front door as she came downstairs and fallen into step beside her without discussion, and she had not asked him to explain it because she understood that some things didn't need explanation. The courthouse was already occupied when they arrived. She saw Margaret and Clifton across the room immediately. Price was with them, and two men she didn't recognize who had the specific posture of paid witnesses. Margaret was composed as always, well-dressed, poised, her expression carrying that quality of serene certainty that Abigail had spent 6 years learning to read correctly. Their eyes met across the room. Margaret inclined her head slightly. Abigail did not nod back. She sat down at the table Webb directed her to and placed her notebook and documentation in front of her, and folded her hands and looked at the commission table at the front of the room where Greer was already seated with two colleagues she did not know. Greer caught her eye. He gave her a single small nod. She breathed. The hearing began. Price opened first, which was expected. He was smooth and well prepared, and he laid out the Bellamy position with the calm confidence of a man who had done this many times. He established the survey filing the county registration, the procedural legitimacy of the claim. He presented the altered ledger pages and characterized them as evidence of mismanagement in the Carter household accounting. He suggested, without saying it plainly, that Abigail's presence at Whitmore Manor and her relationship with Mr. Whitmore represented a conflict of interest in her testimony. Abigail kept her face flat and her hands still. Webb presented their case in the same methodical, unhurried way he did everything. He walked the commission through the original Carter grant documentation. He presented the timeline of survey firm payments from the Whitmore estate accounts. He placed Webb's own affidavit regarding Margaret's June visit, the attempted authentication of the settlement document, before the commission, with the care of someone laying down a card that changes the game. Then he called Abigail. She stood. She walked to the front. She was aware of the room of Whitmore sitting absolutely still at the table behind her, of Greer, watching her with those sharp eyes, of Margaret's composed face across the aisle. She was aware of all of it, and she set it aside, the way she set aside everything that wasn't the work when the work was what mattered. She presented the notebook. She walked the commission through 3 years of parallel records, entry by entry, where it mattered, summary, where it didn't. She spoke in the same even, clear voice she used when she was going through accounts with Henry. No embellishment, no drama. Just the numbers and the dates and what they showed. She was in the middle of the October entries, the first survey firm payments, the dates when Price stood. "I'd like to enter a document into evidence," he said. Greer looked at him. "This is not your time, Mr. Price," Greer said. "The document is directly relevant to the testimony being presented," Price said. "It provides necessary context." Greer looked at his colleagues. A brief exchange. "Proceed," Greer said. Price produced the document. He had it delivered to the commission table and to Webb simultaneously. Webb looked at it. He looked at it for a long time, which was not like Webb. Abigail watched Webb's face. Something was wrong. She kept her own face still. Webb said quietly, without looking up, "Give me a moment." Greer gave him a moment. Webb looked at the document for another 30 seconds. Then he looked at Abigail. "It's the settlement agreement," he said low enough that only she could hear. "And it's not the document she showed me in June." Abigail looked at him. "It's different," she said. "It has your father's signature," Webb said, "and a witness signature I don't recognize." He paused. "And a date that places it 6 months earlier than the one she showed me in June." The room had the quality of held breath. "She had 2 versions," Abigail said. "She made 2, Webb said. Abigail stood very still. 2 forged documents. 2 different versions of the same lie, because the first version hadn't worked. Webb had refused to authenticate it, so she had made another one with a different date, a different witness, constructed to address whatever weakness the first one had. "Webb," Abigail said. "I know," he said. "The witness signature," she said. "Can we identify it?" "I'm going to try," he said. He stood. He addressed the commission. "I'd like to request a brief recess," he said. 15 minutes. Greer looked at the document. Granted, he said. In the hallway outside, Webb moved quickly for a deliberate man to a corner where they could speak without being overheard. Whitmore had followed them out and stood with his back to the wall, in the way he stood when he was listening with his whole attention. "The first document she showed me had a witness I recognized," Webb said. "A clerk from the county register's office who retired in 1812. He's dead, which is why she used him. Dead witnesses can't deny anything. But this document has a different witness," Abigail said. "Someone still living," Webb said. "Which is a risk she wouldn't have taken unless she believed that person would confirm it." He paused. "Or unless that person doesn't know their name is on it." "Their signature was forged too," Whitmore said. "Possibly," Webb said. "Who is it?" Abigail said. Webb told her the name. She stood completely still. It was Thomas Bellamy's name, Margaret's brother-in-law, Clifton's uncle, a man she had met 3 times in her life who lived outside Richmond and had to her knowledge no involvement in the Carter estate whatsoever. "He doesn't know," she said. "How do you know that?" Webb said. "Because I've met him," she said. "He disagreed with Margaret on nearly every family matter I ever witnessed. They barely spoke." She looked at Webb. "He wouldn't have witnessed a document for her voluntarily." Webb and Whitmore looked at each other. "If his signature is forged," Whitmore said, "and we can produce him to say so." "He's in Richmond," Webb said. "Greer is from Richmond," Abigail said. Another look between the 2 men. 15 minutes isn't long enough," Webb said. "Then ask for more," Abigail said. "Tell Greer you need to send an urgent communication to a potential witness. He'll understand what that means." Webb looked at her. "If this doesn't work," he started. "It'll work," she said. "Send the message." He went. She stood in the hallway with Whitmore. "Thomas Bellamy," Whitmore said. "He's an honest man," Abigail said. "Stubborn and inconvenient but honest. If someone forged his name on a document, he'll be furious." "Furious is useful," Whitmore said. "Yes," she said. He was looking at her with that exposed, direct expression, the one that had appeared after 3 weeks had worn down whatever distance he'd maintained by habit. "You thought of that immediately," he said, "as soon as you heard the name." "I know the family," she said. "You know people," he said. "You pay attention to them, what they're actually like, not just what they say." She looked at him. "It's useful in accounting," she said. "And in other things." "In everything," he said. They stood in the hallway for a moment that had the quality of something suspended, not quite still, but moving slowly, the way the air moved before something broke open. "Nathaniel," she said. She had not used his name before. She watched him hear it. "Yes," he said. "Whatever happens in there," she said. "I want you to know that—" She stopped. She looked for the right words, the ones that were true, without being more than she was ready to say. "You gave me a place to stand, before I had standing. That matters more than I can tell you." He looked at her for a long moment. "You gave yourself a place to stand," he said. "I just didn't get in the way." She looked at him. "That's not nothing," she said. "In my experience, that's everything. Something moved across his face, the most unguarded expression she had seen from him yet. Something that had no composure in it at all. He said quietly, Abigail Webb reappeared at the end of the hallway. Greer granted the recess, he said. 2 hours. He's sending his own rider. They went back inside. Thomas Bellamy arrived in 1 hour and 40 minutes, which meant he had been close in town already, or close to it for reasons that became clear when he walked in and looked across the room at Margaret, with an expression that could have stripped paint. He had received a letter that morning. Not from Greer's rider, from someone else. Someone who had sent it 3 days ago and timed it carefully. He held the letter up. He looked at Greer. I have been corresponding with a Mr. Henry Pell, he said, who is a steward at Whitmore Manor and who took it upon himself to write to me last week regarding certain documents being prepared for this hearing. He set the letter on the commission table. He was concerned that my name might appear on documentation I had not agreed to witness. The room was absolutely silent. Abigail looked at the door Whitmore had come back through. She looked at Whitmore, who was looking at the table in front of him, with the careful expression of a man who had decided not to look anywhere else at the moment. Henry Pell. Henry, who had been writing to Thomas Bellamy. Henry, who had apparently been tracking the case with the quiet, thorough attention that Abigail recognized because she had spent weeks sitting across a ledger table from him and understanding exactly how his mind worked. Henry, who had done this on his own, or had been asked to. She looked at Whitmore. He was still looking at the table. She thought he knew. She thought he arranged it without telling me again. She thought with a warmth that was more complicated than anger and more patient than she expected of herself, we are going to have a conversation about this. But not here. Thomas Bellamy took the stand. His testimony was direct and absolute. He had never witnessed any document pertaining to the Carter estate. He had not been present at any meeting involving Margaret and Elias Carter. His signature on the settlement document was not his signature. He could demonstrate this by signing his name again now for the commission to compare. He did. Greer looked at both signatures for about 15 seconds. Then he looked at Price. Price was very still. Margaret was very still. Clifton appeared to be carefully considering whether the chair he was sitting in might provide adequate cover if he simply slid under the table. Greer set the documents down. He looked at his colleagues. He looked at the room. I'm going to ask, he said carefully, that Mr. Price and Mrs. Bellamy remain available for further questions while the commission reviews the complete record. He paused. This hearing is going to run longer than anticipated. It ran until 4 in the afternoon. At 4:17, Greer delivered the commission's preliminary determination. The survey filing on this northern parcel was suspended, pending a full investigation into the documentation presented. The alleged settlement document was referred to the county attorney for assessment of its authenticity. The payments made through Whitmore Manor's estate accounts to the Charlottesville survey firm were flagged for investigation as potential fraud. Margaret and Price were directed to make themselves available to the county attorney within 2 weeks. The northern parcel was placed under a protective order, which meant no one could claim cell transfer or alter it while the investigation proceeded. It was not a complete victory, but it was a beginning. Abigail sat at the table after the room began to empty and held the notebook in both hands and did not move for a full minute. Webb sat beside her. "This is good," he said. "It's a beginning," she said. "In my experience," Webb said, "a solid beginning is most of the work." He paused. "The investigation will find what you found. You documented it well enough. The commission will see it." She nodded. She looked at the notebook. Her mother's bottomland. 23 acres. The herbs that came up every spring regardless. "How long?" she said. "The investigation," he considered. 4 to 6 months. Perhaps less given the pattern Greer's identified. She breathed. 4 to 6 months. She looked up. Whitmore was standing near the back of the room talking to Greer and Thomas Bellamy, and she watched him for a moment, the way he stood, that deliberate stillness, the way he listened when the other person was speaking. Thomas Bellamy said something, and Whitmore tilted his head slightly and said something back that made Bellamy laugh, a short surprised laugh, and Whitmore very nearly smiled. She watched him for a moment. Then she stood. She walked across the room. When she reached him, Greer excused himself with the tact of a man who understood the geography of a moment. Thomas Bellamy followed, shaking her hand on the way past, and saying firmly, "Your father was a good man, Miss Carter. He deserved better from his family." And then walking away before she had to find an answer for that. She and Whitmore stood. "Henry Pell," she said. "Henry Pell," he agreed. "You asked him to write that letter," she said. "I suggested," he said. "Henry made his own decision." She looked at him. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes," he said. "That's twice," she said. "I know," he said. He looked at her steadily. "I'm better with decisions than I am with telling people what I've decided. That's a flaw. I'm aware of it." "Good," she said, "because you're going to need to work on it." Something shifted in his face. "Am I?" he said. "If we're going to continue working together," she said, "yes." He looked at her. "Is that what we're doing?" he said. "Working together?" She looked back at him. "What else would you call it?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of uncertainty, the quiet of a man choosing his words carefully because they mattered. "I would call it that," he said. "To start." "To start," she repeated. "There are other things I'd call it," he said, "when I'm ready to say them." Her heart did something that she did not have a practical accounting-based explanation for. She looked at him for a moment. "When you're ready," she said. He tilted his head slightly. "Will you still be there?" he said. It came out quieter than she thought he intended, unguarded, more exposed than his usual delivery. She understood what he was asking. Not just whether she would be at Whitmore Manor. He was asking something that had to do with the injury and the years of chosen solitude and the specific fear of a man who had become accustomed to people leaving him before he had given them a reason to stay. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes," he said. "I told you 2 months ago," she said. "I have nowhere to go back to." "That's not the same as wanting to stay," he said. She held his gaze. "I want to stay," she said. He looked at her. The afternoon light was long and warm across the courthouse floor, and the room was nearly empty, and outside someone's horses were pulling a cart past on the road, and she could hear the wheels on the dry summer ground. He reached out. He took her hand. Not dramatically, not with any particular weight. Just a clean, deliberate action, his hand closing around hers, careful and certain the way he did everything. She looked down at their joined hands. She looked up at his face. "All right then," he said quietly. "All right," she said. They walked out of the courthouse. The summer afternoon hit her full in the face, warm and dry, the smell of the county road, the long light of a day that was finally starting to turn toward evening. She walked beside him. She did not look back at the building. There was nothing to look back at. The ride back to Whitmore Manor from the courthouse was quiet in the way that came after something large had passed through. Not empty quiet, not the quiet of nothing left to say, but the kind that settled between two people who had been through something together and were still feeling the edges of it. Henry Pell was waiting on the front porch when the carriage came up the lane. He stood up from the step where he'd been sitting and looked at their faces and said, "Well, suspended filing," Whitmore said, stepping down. "Investigation ordered, protective order on the parcel." Henry let out a breath that had clearly been held for several hours. "Good," he said. "That's good." "It is," Whitmore agreed. Abigail stepped down and walked to Henry and looked at him directly. "Thomas Bellamy arrived with a letter," she said. Henry nodded once carefully. "You wrote to him 3 days ago," she said. "I did," he said. "Did Mr. Whitmore ask you to?" Henry looked at Whitmore. Whitmore looked at the middle distance with studied neutrality. "He mentioned," Henry said slowly, "that if there existed a family member of Mrs. Bellamy's who was known to be an honest man and who might have concerns about documents being prepared in his name, such a person might appreciate knowing about it in advance." Abigail looked at Whitmore. Whitmore continued looking at the middle distance. "I see," she said. "I made my own decision," Henry said firmly. about the letter and the timing. "I know you did, Henry," she said. She put her hand briefly on his arm. "It was the right decision. Thank you." Henry looked enormously relieved. Dolly appeared at the front door with the expression of a woman who had been managing anxiety by cooking since morning. "There's supper," she said. "And apple cake. Come inside." They came inside. Supper was the best meal Abigail had eaten in years, which she understood had less to do with the food, though the food was good, than with the specific quality of sitting at a table where she was wanted. Where her place at the table was not a concession, or a calculation, or a performance of generosity. Where Dolly passed her the bread without ceremony, and Henry talked about a fence line dispute on the east property that had resolved itself that afternoon, and Nell and Bess came in from the kitchen with the apple cake, still warm, and everyone ate it without waiting for a special occasion. Whitmore sat at the head of the table and said little, which was typical, but the quality of his silence was different tonight. Warmer. Less contained. He refilled her coffee without being asked, which he had never done before, and when Henry said something that made Abigail laugh, a real laugh, the kind that came up before she could manage it, Whitmore looked at her with an expression he didn't bother to compose away. Dolly saw it. Dolly looked at her plate with the satisfied expression of a woman who had been waiting for something to become obvious and had finally been given the satisfaction of watching it arrive. After supper, Henry and Dolly and the girls went back to the household in the easy way of people who had work to do and trusted mornings to take care of themselves, and Abigail and Whitmore were left at the table with the remnants of the apple cake and the late evening settling around the house. She said, "You need to tell me when you decide things that involve me." "I know," he said. "Not her," she said. "Before." "I'm working on it," he said. "That's not reassurance," she said. "It's an honest answer," he said. "Which I reckon is better." She looked at him. "It is," she said. "But I'm going to hold you to working on it." "I expected you would," he said. There was that suggestion of warmth in his voice, barely there, just a thread. "You hold people to things, I've noticed." "I hold myself to things first," she said. "I know," he said. "That's how I know you mean it when you say it to someone else." She looked at the table. She looked at the last piece of apple cake sitting between them. "Henry told me something last week," she said. "He said you've been riding the North Field every morning for 6 months, not just this month." "It's my property," he said. "He said you started riding it more frequently after you saw the survey filing," she said. "The one with the Bellamy name on it." Whitmore was quiet. "I wanted to know what I was dealing with," he said. "You went out and walked the land," she said. "I rode it," he said. "I don't walk well enough for that kind of terrain." He said it plainly, without self-consciousness, which was the first time she had heard him refer to his leg directly. She looked at him. "Nathaniel," she said. "It's a fact," he said. "I don't need sympathy for it." "I'm not offering sympathy," she said. "I'm paying attention." He looked at her. "You always are," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "So stop being surprised by it." He almost smiled. She pushed the last piece of apple cake toward him. He cut it in half without discussion and pushed half back. They finished it in a comfortable silence that felt like something they had been building toward without knowing it. A silence that had the quality of a room where two people had learned to take up space together without either of them shrinking. 3 weeks after the hearing, the first piece of news arrived from the county attorney's office. It was not what Abigail expected. She expected confirmation of the investigation timeline. She expected procedural updates. She did not expect the letter that Henry brought to the estate office door on a Tuesday morning with an expression she couldn't immediately read, something between serious and significant. She opened it. She read it. She read it again. The county attorney had been examining the survey firm's records, which had been compelled by the commission's order. In those records, they had found not one fraudulent survey, but 4. 4 land filings across 2 counties, all dated within the same 18-month window, all using the same surveying firm, all connected to a network of transactions that shared 2 characteristics: unregistered parcels, targeted with precision, and the same intermediary attorney, a man named Price. Garfield Price of Charlottesville was not simply Margaret Bellamy's attorney. He was the architect. The letter named 5 families whose land had been taken through the same method. 5 families. 27 acres total across 4 parcels, all seized through falsified surveys and forged agreements. The Carter parcel had been the most recent, and the one that had been caught. Abigail set the letter down. She sat with it for a moment. 5 families. She had walked into this hearing thinking about her father's land, about her mother's herbs, about 23 acres and a fraudulent survey, and a woman who had needed her gone. She had not known she was pulling on a thread attached to something much larger. She picked up the letter and walked to the study. Whitmore read it standing up. He read it once and then set it on the desk and looked at her. "Price," he said. "Price," she said. "He's the one who designed it," Whitmore said. "He identified the parcels," Abigail said. "He would have had access to county register records in his legal capacity. He knew which land was unregistered, which families were vulnerable, which estates had documentation gaps. And he recruited people like Margaret to execute it," Whitmore said. "People with local standing who could make the claims look legitimate." "She wasn't the victim of a scheme," Abigail said. "She was a willing participant." "She chose this," Whitmore said. "She chose this," Abigail confirmed. Something settled in her chest when she said it, not peace exactly, but a kind of final clarity. The last piece of wondering whether there had been some pressure on Margaret that had made her this way, some desperation that had narrowed her options, that wonder was gone now. Margaret had been offered a tool and a method, and a man who would manage the legal exposure, and she had picked it up and used it. She had chosen it. "What happens to Price?" Abigail said. "Disbarment at minimum," Whitmore said. "Criminal charges if the county attorney can establish fraud with intent across multiple filings." He looked at her. "He'll fight it. He has resources." "But Greer is involved now," she said. "Greer was already building a case before you walked into this," Whitmore said. "You gave him the documentation that made it actionable." She thought about that, about walking up the lane to Whitmore Manor with a single bag and $4.60. About sitting at the kitchen table and thinking about what she actually had. She had not known that day that she was carrying the thing that would bring down a scheme that had been running for 18 months across 2 counties. She had just been trying to survive. "The other 4 families," she said. "Greer will notify them through the commission," Whitmore said. "The protective orders will extend to their parcels as well." "They'll get their land back," she said. "Most of it," he said. "Some of the earlier transactions may be harder to unwind." He paused. "But yes, most of it." She thought about 5 families, about what it meant to have land taken, about her father who had trusted that family did not require paperwork, and what that trust had cost him. "Good," she said. She picked up the letter. She looked at it one more time. Then she set it down carefully and went back to work. The formal determination from the Land Commission came in January, 5 months after the hearing. 2 months after Price's disbarment proceedings began in Charlottesville. 1 month after Clifton Bellamy, facing his own set of questions about estate transactions, had quietly left Harlow County for reasons he did not publicize. The letter from Greer was 4 pages long and precise in every particular, but the part that mattered was a single sentence on the second page. The northern parcel, comprising 23 acres of the original Carter land grant, is hereby restored to the Carter estate, with full documentation filed with the county register under the name of Abigail Carter as the surviving heir of Elias Carter. Surviving heir. Her name. On a county register. With 23 acres attached to it. She was in the estate office when she read it. She read it standing up because Henry had brought it in while she was between tasks, and she had opened it right there at the doorway with her pencil still in her hand. Henry watched her read it. When she looked up, he was smiling. "Well," he said. She looked at the letter. "It's done," she said. Henry let out a breath. "Lord Almighty," he said. "It's done." She pressed her lips together. She breathed through her nose once steady. She was not going to cry in the estate office doorway. She was a practical woman with a household to manage and accounts to finish, and a September provisioning review that she had been putting off for 2 days. She pressed her lips together harder. Henry very tactfully turned around and walked toward the kitchen, saying something about needing to find Dolly, giving her 30 seconds of privacy that she used to stand completely still, with her hand flat against the doorframe, and feel the full weight of what was in that letter. Her name, her land, her father's land given back to her with the county seal on it. She straightened up. She went to find Whitmore. Howe was in the study. She knocked, which she did not always do, and he said, "Come in," and she came in and crossed the room and put the letter on his desk without speaking. He read it. He read it twice, slowly. He set it down. He looked at her. She met his eyes, and she did not have anything prepared to say, because she had come to him first, before she had words for any of it, because he was the person she had wanted to tell first. He stood up. He came around the desk. He stopped in front of her, closed the way he had stood in the front drive months ago in that space that was neither too close nor far enough to be comfortable, and he looked at her with the most unguarded expression she had ever seen from him. "Abigail," he said. "I know," she said. "Your father's land," he said. "My land," she said. Her voice was entirely steady, which she was proud of. He reached out and took her hand, the same way he had taken it outside the courthouse, clean and deliberate, no performance in it. His thumb moved across her knuckles, once a small thing, barely a gesture. "I have something to say to you," he said. "All right," she said. "I told you in September," he said, "that there were things I'd call this when I was ready to say them." "You did," she said. "I'm ready," he said. She looked at him. I was not a man who said things dramatically. He was not a man who arranged moments. He was a man who said what he meant when he meant it, and trusted the meaning to be enough. "I have been alone in this house for 4 years, he said. "I had reasons I thought were good. The leg. The way the war changed things. The way it seemed easier to manage a property and keep my own counsel than to risk the particular kind of loss that comes from letting someone in." He paused. "I had become very good at being alone." "I know," she said. "You walked in here with a single bag," he said, "sent as a joke by a woman who wanted you gone. And in 2 months, you rebuilt this household, uncovered a fraud, brought a case to the Land Commission, and made this place." He stopped. He looked for the word. "Alive," he said. "You made it feel like a place people lived in, not just worked in." She looked at their joined hands. "Dolly helped," she said. "Abigail," he said. "And Henry," she said. "Abigail." There was the warmth in his voice now, something deeper than the almost smile, something that had been building since October and was finally done being patient. "I am trying to tell you that I love you. If you could let me get through it." She looked up at him. He looked back at her with those direct, measuring eyes that she had spent 5 months learning to read. She could read them now. She knew what lived behind them, the discipline and the care and the specific stubbornness of a man who, once he had decided something, was entirely decided. He had decided her. "I'm listening," she said. "That was most of it," he said. "That was all of it," she said. "The rest is a question," he said. "Whether you'd be willing, whether you want." He stopped again. Not uncertainty, she understood. He was choosing precision. "I am asking you to marry me. Not because you need the protection. Not because the property makes more sense combined. Because I want to sit across a table from you for the rest of my life and argue about ledger entries and watch you do the thing where you find the number that doesn't reconcile in 40 seconds and pretend you're not pleased with yourself." She stared at him. "I don't pretend," she said. "You do," he said. "You go very still and you press your lips together and you think I don't notice." "You notice everything," she said. "I notice you," he said. "Specifically." The study was warm and very quiet. She thought about the night she had packed her bag and sat on the edge of her bed and taken inventory of what she actually had. Her mind, her discipline, her reputation such as it was. She had not put Nathaniel Whitmore on that list because he hadn't existed yet. Not to her, not as anything more than a name that people said with weather respect. She had not known that 6 miles up the road from everything she was losing, there was a man who would look at what she could do and say, "Tell me more." Who would stand next to her in a courtroom and mean it? Who would notice that she went still when she found the number and press his lips together the exact same way because he was pleased too? She had not known that. She knew it now. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," she said again clearly, because he was a man who appreciated precision. He brought her hand up. He held it against his chest over the place where his heart was and looked at her with something she understood was not going to diminish. It was the kind of thing that grew, she thought. Put it in good soil, and it kept coming back. Like herbs along the edge of a field. Like stubbornness properly applied. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They married in March. Not a large ceremony. Whitmore had no patience for large ceremonies, and Abigail had no one to fill the pews with on her side, which had once seemed like a wound, and now seemed simply like a fact she had moved past. Webb came from Richmond. Greer came and brought his wife, a sharp, warm woman named Clara, who took one look at Abigail and said, "Finally, someone in this county with actual sense," which Abigail decided to take as a compliment. Henry Pell stood up for Whitmore. Dolly stood up for Abigail. It was a small room and the right people in it, and when the minister asked Nathaniel Whitmore if he would take this woman, he said yes in the flat. Certain voice he used for things he had decided entirely, and Abigail said yes, in the clear, steady voice she used when she meant something, and that was enough. More than enough. Afterward in the carriage, back to Whitmore Manor, back home. Nathaniel took her hand, the way he had outside the courthouse and in the study, and every time since, clean and deliberate and certain. "We need to talk about the northern parcel," she said. He looked at her. "Today," he said. "The spring planting window is closing," she said. "If we're going to put in the kitchen garden extension along the bottomland edge this year, we need to decide on the seed order in the next 2 weeks." Howe was quiet for a moment. "We," he said. She looked at him. "We," she said. Something warm and settled moved across his face. "Corn or kitchen garden," he said. "Kitchen garden first," she said. "The soil at the edge is better suited. Henry agrees." "Henry would," he said. "Henry is usually right," she said. "Henry is occasionally insufferably right," he said, with a thread of warmth that told her he was deeply fond of Henry and would never say so directly to his face. She laughed. The real laugh, the one that came up before she could manage it. She felt it in her chest the same way she had felt it the first time, whole and warm and unguarded. He looked at her when she laughed the same way he had looked at her the first time. Like a man who had found something he hadn't known he was looking for. By April, the northern parcel had its kitchen garden extension. Abigail planted it herself on a Tuesday morning on her knees in the bottomland soil, with her hands working the furrows in the way her mother had taught her before she was old enough to understand what she was learning. Dolly came out at mid-morning with coffee and sat on the fence rail and talked about nothing in particular while Abigail worked, which was its own kind of companionship. The herbs she planted along the rocky edge were the same ones her mother had grown. Columbine. Lavender. The tough, difficult-to-kill varieties that came back regardless. Nathaniel came out at noon and leaned on the fence beside Dolly and watched her. She knew he was watching. She didn't look up. "The furrows are 2 inches too close," he said. "They're exactly right," she said. "Henry." "I know what Henry would say," she said. "Henry is thinking about corn. I'm thinking about lavender, different root systems." A pause. "Fair enough," he said. She heard the fence creak as he climbed over it, heard the deliberate, careful steps as he crossed toward her. He crouched down beside her, which she knew cost him something with the leg, though he would not say so, and looked at the furrow she was working. "Show me," he said. She showed him. He watched with that focused, thorough attention he gave to things that mattered. "All right," he said. "You're right." "I usually am," she said. "You're occasionally insufferably right," he said. She looked at him. He was very close, crouched beside her in the bottomland with his hands on his knees, looking at her with that warm, decided expression that she had come to understand was simply what his face did now when it was directed at her. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes," he said. My mother planted these same herbs on this same land, she said, 20 years ago. He looked at the rocky edge of the field. He looked at her. I know, he said. She would have liked this, she said. Having it back. Having it be this. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from her face with 2 fingers, a small gesture, careful and deliberate like everything he did. His hand stayed against her cheek for a moment. She would have liked you, he said, from everything you've told me. Abigail looked at the furrows. She was stubborn, she said, and she kept good records. I see the resemblance, he said. She laughed. He stood up the careful redistribution of weight, the slight hitch, and offered her his hand. She took it. He pulled her to her feet, and she stood in her father's field on her mother's bottomland, in the spring sunlight, on 23 acres that had her name on them at the county register. She stood there with her husband's hand in hers, and the smell of turned earth around her, and the first small green shoots of lavender, already showing at the rocky edge of the field, coming back the way they always came back, stubborn and permanent, and precisely where they were supposed to be. Behind her, Dolly called from the fence rail that the coffee was getting cold. Whitmore called back that they were coming. Abigail looked at the field one more time. Then she turned toward home. The woman who had been sent away as a joke had built something no one could take from her, not with a forged document, not with a fraudulent survey, not with 6 years of careful diminishment designed to make her believe she had nothing worth protecting. She had built it from a single bag and $4.60, and the kind of stubbornness that came not from pride, but from knowing deep in the place where knowing lived that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She walked back across her own land. She had nowhere else to be. She was already home.